Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
The month of December that year was unusual. First, for a whole week, an entire wall of thick snow fell. It blocked the road between the orphanage and the outside world for a while. Even the almighty Frederick in his bus couldn't get through the snowdrifts that covered the dirt road. He didn't try. At some point, the wall of snow became so thick that nothing could be seen. Finally, the snow ran out, and under its weight, the centuries-old fir trees bowed almost to the ground. Then Marta and the other girls and pupils, together with the principal and the driver, and the mothers of the educators, went out to fight. For several days in a row, they wielded shovels, spatulas, and scrapers. The inhabitants of Blackbird collected huge mountains of snow, which the children rolled over with delight. But as soon as this hard work was over, the heat arrived and everything began to melt. It was now difficult to walk from the dormitories to the school building because of the ice. At the end of December, the clouds began to thicken again. Everyone expected the new year to be beautiful and snowy. They set up a huge, fluffy Christmas tree in the courtyard and hung up the toys they had made themselves. Frederick managed to put a star on the top of the tree from a high ladder. After the snowfall, after working with the children, after decorating the tree, Martha had the feeling that her life would soon change. Soon, she would finally have the house she had always dreamed of. The school principal demanded that when he saw 8-year-old Martha with a mop, she should speak 3 times louder. The girl had never heard a kind word from him in her life. The principal was to be addressed only by his patronymic and with the greatest possible respect. He himself determined the degree to which he fulfilled the second requirement, and he was rarely satisfied. It is true that he conveyed indignation with words and used only human punishments. His favorite method of influencing disobedient children was to wean them off their devices, when they were forbidden to use phones and tablets. The director had realized a long time ago that the fear of losing internet access was very strong in the younger generation. In a way, he himself shared this fear. "Oh, John, the criticism is understandable," Martha replied obediently, wringing out the cloth. "I'll wash and polish it." "What? No respect?" The principal was indignant and then, lowering his voice, added, "I'll see you tonight at my house for our lesson, understand?" After saying that, he went to his office. Despite John's repugnant character, his approach to education deserved respect. If in other orphanages the children did nothing for themselves, in Merlot, on the contrary, they were used to working from an early age. They cooked, cleaned, picked fruit and vegetables. John always said, "You're not children, you're little adults. My job is to make sure that you don't get lost on the way to old age, that you stop being a burden, that you stop being parasites. Only by working and striving to be better people will you harden, like a clay pot in the oven." Even at Blackbird, I couldn't do without staff. That's why, in addition to the 10 educating mothers, there were 2 cleaners, a shopkeeper, and a driver. The teachers came. They never stayed in the classrooms after 3 o'clock. Frederick took the older children by bus to the local school. Martha couldn't wait to be old enough to go. She enjoyed the trips. The principal always emphasized that he was the only one in the orphanage who only had idlers and loafers, vagabonds and slackers. John was the official guardian of each boy and girl, and only he decided, quite officially, which of them could have a chance as foster parents. For as long as she could remember, Martha had always wanted a family. She knew, from snippets of information from her caregivers, that she had had a mother and a father, more or less, until she was 2 years old. They never told her what happened after that. John attributed this to child welfare. "It's too early for you to know these things," he said every time the child started this conversation. When will I know?" asked Martha. At this point, the tears were beginning to choke her, but she held back. "Soon," replied the principal. "Soon, but not now." Most of the adoptive families were very young children, 2 or 3 years old. They appeared here all year round, without any system, but there were always only a few. According to John's cunning plan, his students were also supposed to take tests as nannies. Martha and her classmates were also nannies, feeding and changing diapers. Although some found these activities humiliating, the girl enjoyed playing with the children, dressing, and feeding them as if she were having fun with a big doll. But this was the kind of child who didn't stay long at the orphanage. They probably didn't even have time to realize what had happened to them. Marta had high hopes for December because it was a time of miracles. No wonder she constantly received offers to make a wish, write a letter to Santa Claus, read the good luck. In general, if anything could change in her life, it was now, on New Year's Eve, the only time when the orphanage seemed quite bearable. Volunteers and clowns came to visit. There were New Year's games, quizzes, a bubble show, and they taught them to draw. It was all great, of course, but Martha wanted something more. She wanted to go home, go to her room and decorate the Christmas tree with her parents. So, in a letter to Santa Claus, whose existence she never doubted for a second, the little girl again diligently deduced, "Dear Grandpa, I want Mommy, Daddy, and a brother. P.S. and a new cell phone because the old one started running out of battery very quickly." At the end of December, with unprecedented snowfall, the school vacations began, which meant that there would be no classes for 2 whole weeks. The teachers were able to take time off from the negligent students, of which Martha was one. Her semester grades weren't great, but she didn't understand why she needed another one. The New Year's race is a completely different story. Together with the clowns and volunteers, the prospective parents visit the Blackbird shelter. They observe the children, talk and play with them, and then they choose the best ones for themselves. A classmate called Harry used another word for perspective. "They'll take you immediately when you're a puppy," Harry said, "or they'll keep you here forever." "Why?" asked Martha at the time. Harry, now almost 10 years old, seemed extremely intelligent and experienced. "Because neither you nor I are promising. And grown-ups only want people like you, obedient, not a nuisance and all that." Harry's version of his future fathers and mothers didn't sound like much. Perhaps he could listen to his future parents, and he certainly wouldn't upset them. Martha didn't even know why there was hardly any interest in her. Well, there was interest. For as long as she could remember, the uncles and aunts who came to the orphanage liked to play with her. Many were interested in her hobbies, her studies, and other things. But in the presence of strangers, she was shy and couldn't answer anything. She just mumbled and nodded, and once she even fainted. The school principal was tactless and bluntly told the guests, "Don't listen to her. She's behind in her development, but we still love her." While Blackbird was experiencing the excitement of New Year's Eve, the mood of the owner of a cozy apartment in Moscow was depressed. That year, Selena decided not to put up the Christmas tree, not to write a letter to Santa Claus, and not even to turn on the TV. Her husband accepted her decision with understanding. He himself couldn't stand the holidays, although she didn't go into details. Selena's woes had been dragging on for years. When she returned from her year-long trip around the world, she was horrified to learn that Maddie, her older sister, had died. No one had called to tell her the sad news. No one had told her the details. She had to hear everything from the police and the inquest. Lately, they hadn't been particularly friendly. Their views on life were 180 degrees different. But there was also something that could unite them. After all, her sister still had a daughter, Myrtle. In life, Maddie didn't allow Selena to spend time with her daughter, canceling her visits under various pretexts. Even when the baby was unwell, she refused to help. But at least she would call from time to time and send photos. She and Maddie had no one else, no close or distant relatives, but they had friends in common. Those who tried and failed to contact the girl thought that she simply wasn't interested in her sister's life and death. The reason for the silence was prosaic. The girl was in the remote mountains, with no communication with the outside world. However, the feeling of anxiety from those days did not leave her. Now Selena blamed herself for having embarked on such a long journey of self-discovery and, as a consequence, losing Myrtle. At night, she imagined the child lying next to her in the cradle and saying something to her in her baby language. When the girl returned to her home country and recovered from the first shock, she immediately started looking for her niece. But by a strange coincidence, no one could find her. At first, they refused to provide information, claiming personal details. "They have different surnames," said an employee at a personal reception. "Do you have any of your sister's documents? Copies?" "No," replied Selena. It took her a year to confirm her relationship with Maddie. They had the same mother, but different fathers and surnames. Then came the endless circles of bureaucratic hell. Selima, an artist and designer, was not fluent in the strange language she had to speak to the officials, and they were in no hurry to approach her and help her through her pain. "Where were you for a whole year after your sister's death?" asked the woman from the education department angrily. "Why didn't you come running immediately?" "I was out of the country," Selena replied. "You see," shouted the official. "Are you sure you want this? What if you want to leave the country again for a year?" "You need to find her," Selena whispered. She immediately felt ashamed of the pressure. She couldn't disappear without a trace. "We have 400,000 orphans in this country," the woman continued to scold her. "Do I have to check every single one of them?" Then she received 2 consecutive rejections. The girl with Mirth Lansky's details was not registered in the orphan registration system. And what does that mean? Anything. Lost, mistaken, detained, adopted. The information is confidential and will not be released to the public. Each flaw made Selena feel disappointed in Saul. Had they really adopted the child, given her a new name and surname? Could she not even hold her hand and show her something important? The girl must have been 8 years old. Her last attempt to find her niece was 2 years ago. After that, Selena didn't feel strong enough to keep looking. But recently, a man with the most romantic profession in the world, a private investigator, came into her life. He supported her in her reluctance to create a New Year's mood, but he put a surprise under the tree for her. "Darling," he said with a smile, "I did everything I could and couldn't do." And there was a light at the end of the tunnel. It turned out that Anthony wasn't just listening to her endless story about the loss of her niece, but was gathering information bit by bit. In a matter of months, using authorized and unauthorized techniques, he did what it had taken her years to find traces of her niece. "There's a rather strange orphanage," Anthony said. "Experimental or something. Can you believe it? There's hardly any staff." "Is my niece there?" asked Selena hopefully. "I don't want you to take too much notice of that," she admitted frankly. "I have a complete list of children here, as you can see. If anyone finds out, my license will be in tears. So don't tell anyone. There's no Myrtle Lansky, but there is a Martha Linsky." "What if it's a coincidence?" "There's only one way to find out," Anthony said. "We have to get in there somehow and find out. After all, you're a close relative. You should know." "Oh, love, if only it were that easy." "They'll have an open house next week," said the private detective thoughtfully. "It's a long drive, of course, but if we go right now, we can get there." "I don't know if I'm ready," Selena whispered. "What if it doesn't work out again? What if I'm disappointed again?" If someone had asked her, "What's your name, Grandma?" she would have thought for at least 5 minutes. What is it really? At the age of 70, the cleaner at the Merlot orphanage was full of strength and energy, even as she sometimes forgot her name. Just kidding. She had several dozen students under her command. True, she didn't have to line them up and teach them anything. All they had to do was accept the job of cleaning the premises. It was a simple job, but one that was in high demand. Betty discovered that the children liked her very much. In fact, boys and girls can also be strict. Behind her eyes, they called Vasilievna by a funny nickname, the Flying Dutchman. The rougher ones joked that the old concierge was already counting the absences at the cemetery. But she didn't know all this, didn't hear or notice, and therefore had a good opinion of her children. The only one who made her very uncomfortable was the director, John, a man of 35, with no family and no children. A career man, a passionate man. That's the kind of man who keeps the country running. He spent day and night at the orphanage, but the children never heard a kind word from him. He often shouted at them, believing that this was the most effective way of getting his message across. Recently, Betty witnessed this behavior again. "If you behave like that, you'll go straight to reform school," the principal reprimanded another boy. His crime was to sneak into the kitchen late at night and steal a loaf of bread. But he was discovered and caught by the store owner. "Forgive me, 7-7, cried the boy. "I was so hungry." "What did you call me, you rascal?" "You'll have a good breakfast," continued the director. "And you had a very good dinner today. Did you know that overeating is a sin? I'll leave you without braces for a month, understand? Tell your mother, the teacher, and I'll make sure she takes action, and we'll take it to the council." Betty didn't understand the strange ban on keeping sweets in children's rooms. Her grandson, who had left school a long time ago, couldn't live a day without jam, marshmallows, marshmallows. And he grew up as a normal person, never going to jail. But he hasn't abandoned his childhood habits. He still craves something sweet. Betty, the director spoke out loud, although he tried to keep his voice down when addressing the old woman. You should be more careful, more careful. Yesterday I found dust. Aha, replied the grandmother. Whatever you say, John, you're our golden man. I congratulate you on your respect, said the principal, but I ask you to fulfill your obligations. All the old cleaner did was mop the floor on the second floor, in the wing where there was a common room and the director's offices. She occupied 2 of them, one for sleeping and one for working. When Betty entered the living room, she couldn't believe her eyes. Did John's salary really afford him this luxury? The room itself would be more suited to a hotel than an orphanage. For one thing, the room was really big. Secondly, during the repair and creation of comfort, money was obviously not spared or counted. Decorative painting of the walls, plastering, air conditioning, and other attributes of a successful life. To open or close a window, you didn't have to pull the handle, but press the buttons on the remote control. If Betty hadn't been a cleaner at the orphanage, she wouldn't have known that this miracle of technology existed. In the corner was a single bed, but what a bed! On the left there was a remote control, no longer wired, that allowed you to adjust the softness, the inclination, and the various types of massage. A leather sofa with a perfect surface, an expensive coffee machine, a luxury wristwatch, a telescope, a huge laptop, headphones that looked like they had come off the page of a magazine about the distant future, and also a shower cubicle that looked like the escape pod of a spaceship with so many buttons. And all this had to be cleaned with different cloths and means. God forbid we should mix everything up. Betty, you're the only person I can trust, the director told her. I can't trust anyone else, only you. You're gold, not a human being, replied the cleaner. I'll do anything, don't doubt it. John loved compliments, but he hated dust and dirt. If he saw a single stain, he was furious. And when the coronavirus epidemic hit, the director went crazy with caution. For a whole year, he kept volunteers and adopters away. Perhaps he was right about one thing. Betty herself was so ill that she almost gave her soul to God. After a month's absence, she returned to the orphanage and was amazed to see that the director's 2 offices were spotlessly clean. I ask you one thing, Betty, he demanded. Don't let anyone, and never dare to enter my room. You're responsible for that with your head. And who's coming in, beautiful? Asked the cleaner. Who's coming in? The principal was surprised. The children. They're going to come in here and ruin everything. They will. That's how Betty lived her life, without remembering her name. Anyway, there was no other job in town. Blackbird had built his nest 10 kilometers from the big city, not far from the forest and his hometown. And even though he didn't get paid much, he still loved the orphanage. And he cried when he saw the children without parents. If I could, thought the cleaner, if I could, I'd keep them all for myself. It's not bad here, but it's better in my own home. Then Betty remembered that she was 70 years old and immediately calmed down. She filled a bucket with water, took a mop, not a mop, but a mop not made of cloth, but of fiber, and went to clean the second floor. But one day, as she passed the principal's office in the afternoon, she heard something that took her breath away and made her face turn white. Why, John, you're a golden man, thought the janitor, her heart clenching. Martha knew how to keep a secret. In her orphanage, if you said something in secret, you were laughed at. Children don't know the difference between half measures. They either love with all their heart or hate with all their soul. That's why I didn't have any close friends. If you tell someone a secret, tomorrow the whole orphanage will know. You know something, Harry, he told me one day, and Tim looked at me, and he smiled. Really, he smiled with malice. He looked at you like that. The next day, the whole orphanage called them boyfriend and girlfriend. Martha was embarrassed, but Harry rolled his eyes and told her that he hadn't spoken to anyone about it. After the stories had been repeated several times, Martha realized that no one could be trusted. Rumors were like eyelashes. You could live with it, but it was unpleasant. A year ago, Martha had a secret. What a secret. Now she and John had one thing in common. Not often, not even every week, He invited her to his office, but it wasn't an office where just any student could go. Martha had access to the most sacred place, the principal's room. Like Bethy, she was struck by the beauty of the room. Officially, her nightly visits to John's room were called self-knowledge sessions. It all started with the principal reprimanding Martha for her developmental delays, and he said it so often and so convincingly that the girl believed him. D in math, she listed. C in geography. If she keeps this up, she'll go straight to the bar. Do you hear me? Martha had no idea what a panel was and was too embarrassed to ask. Her lessons with the principal were no less strange than the mysterious word panel. He would play videos for her on his huge laptop, let her look at the moon and the stars through the telescope, and he would tell her things, tell her things, tell her things. Although Martha was only a child, she knew something was wrong, but who could she talk to about the principal's strange pedagogy? She was the most important person in Myrtle's life, and she had no idea that she could complain about him to anyone and reveal the secret they shared. John, he asked, gathering his courage. Kathy had met relatives last week. Far away, yes. Where? Asked the director, boasting. Well, and what's his name? Sit down, you two. I told you to study geography. John scolded her. Learn geography and math. Without them, you'll never achieve anything in life and you'll end up, you know where? Right next. Let him look for relatives, Martha explained, her eyes downcast. What if I have them somewhere? No, said the director. You're an orphan, alone as the wind in the field. Alone like a star in the sky. The neighboring systems appear to be close together, but in reality they are light years away. It would take a lifetime to reach the nearest one. And if you look for it, Martha continued, but not so confidently, it's a waste of time, shouted the director. Get over here. Let's start the lesson. The girl blushed immediately. Here at the orphanage, she had many subjects. John treated the children like adults, which he didn't have time to repeat. And in addition to the usual math, English, geography, and other subjects, they had very interesting ones. Children's rights, for example, or conflicts, where they were taught how to resolve the causes of children's fights and arguments. Or design, where an old lady taught them how to sew skirts, gloves, and aprons. Or cooking, where Martha pressed cookies with a mold and they learned how to make salads. But I had never seen such strange teaching anywhere, and she suspected it was all wrong. John would give her a pill that made the world seem to disappear, sit her next to him and say, Repeat after me, Martha. Repeat after me. The principal's demand that she keep her lessons a secret, she would have kept to herself. And even if she wanted to tell someone, who would believe her? So she repeated the principal's strange words, even though it made her heart feel heavy and bitter. As New Year's Eve approached, the orphanage began to receive visitors, godparents, volunteers, staff, and expected mothers and fathers. Everyone was welcomed by John, and it was as if he had been replaced by someone else. On days like this, the director was helpful, polite, diplomatic, and courteous. Martha loved this time because there were new faces in the orphanage, and she missed new faces. She wanted the guests to radiate joy and joviality, because there were those who shed tears and held their children close to them, stifling their sobs. It's not nice when a stranger cries into your sweatshirt and hugs you so tightly, as if he wants to strangle you. The moms and dads to be always followed the sponsors, volunteers, and staff. They looked at the babies, trying to find the right one, blushing and embarrassed. The dads to be were always shy and hesitant. There were some that John literally had to take by the hand. Others feared the children like fire, and others tried to talk to them as if they were dogs. And they were genuinely surprised that a little boy of 3 or 4 could make sense of seemingly difficult questions. Once, Martha overheard a conversation between a serious man in an elegant jacket and his wife with a face full of ointment. 911. Look at that one over there, said the head of the family, pointing almost imperceptibly. He looks like me, don't you think? But we always wanted a girl, objected his wife, pouting. Look how pretty she is. Tall, blue eyes. You can tell she has noble blood. Like you and me, my dear. You what? Her husband interrupted her in a whisper so loud that half the orphanage could hear. This so-called beauty? Mr. Director says she has a history of deviant behavior. No way, We don't want criminals in the family. Martha had no idea what deviant behavior was, but she believed that the director could say anything to keep certain children out of the orphanage. Of course, because of her age, Martha was not aware of many things. For example, why did the director let some children go so easily? Why did he try to put others in, and why did he keep others with him? There had to be a logic, but she couldn't see it. However, she couldn't take away the man's pedagogical skills. That snowy December, John decided to show his talent as a director and staged a real performance of the Snow Queen. There was no part for Martha, so she sat in the auditorium. This large room with 100 comfortable chairs and a beautiful stage is another of the director's achievements. Although the girl was able to see the dress rehearsal, the show itself was magnificent. Now she dreamed that one day she too would play Gerda. She loved the role, especially the girl's transformation. Next to Martha in the audience were the same man and woman who had spoken about the orphans a few minutes earlier. "Oh, how I wish I had Kai," exclaimed the woman. "What an actor." "Hey, my dear," whispered the husband loudly. "He's 10 years old. If you get a boy, get the youngest. That way he'll never know he's adopted." There was an indignant hiss from all sides. Martha was ready to join the voices of discontent, but John had given her his strange lesson the day before, and now she couldn't concentrate on anything. Some of the guests were asking her questions, trying to get to know her, but she couldn't answer. She wandered and listened as if she were half asleep or in a fog. However, some guests could be persistent. After the presentation, a beautiful woman with white hair and blue eyes approached her. She was accompanied by a man whom Martha immediately dubbed, in her childish mind, a guard. He kept looking around, adjusting his jacket from time to time. "Your name is Martha, isn't it?" asked the woman with a smile, taking a seat. The girl nodded. "My name is Aunt Selena. My lover and I were looking after the children and we saw you. You're wonderful. Would you like to have some tea and talk to us?" Martha wanted to answer, "Yes, I was always waiting for one of the guests to take me by the hand and lead me to the closet. We talked about everything, and then we were mother and daughter. And then we'd go far away from here, far away, wherever the eye could see us." But her tongue was stuck to the roof of her mouth, and she refused to obey. So instead of giving a meaningful answer, she just opened and closed her mouth like a fish. "What about tea?" asked the woman fearfully. "You drink tea, don't you, dear?" Martha remained silent, opening her mouth like a fish. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, John appeared with his characteristic smile that he always gave his guests. He approached the beautiful woman and whispered something in her ear. But unlike the other adults, she did not or move away from Martha, but reacted rather abruptly. "I appreciate your participation," she said, "but I want to talk to Martha, and that's what I'm going to do. Anthony, bring us 2 cups of tea, one large and one smaller." The guard looked at the director with an icy stare that made him swallow nervously. The staring match, as Martha called it to herself, lasted at least 5 seconds. But John lost. He blinked, then pulled himself together, put on his characteristic ceremonial smile like a tie, and said in his most admonishing tone, "It's good that you have your own head on your shoulders," he said. "But don't forget who's in charge. The next time there are such aggressive guests, perhaps I won't let them enter the threshold of our glorious house." With those words he left, and Martha, who was a little frightened by the situation, spoke again. Suddenly, the girl realized that she wanted to be like that beautiful woman when she grew up, to respond with pride and courage to all the principal's demands, and not to whisper in her ear, but to speak out loud for everyone to hear. She swallowed, looked at her unknown aunt, and said in a whisper, "Martha, my name is Martha. I like green tea. Well, Anthony's gone now. If he brings black, I'll tell him to change. Black is fine too. I'll take anything with sugar. Martha, my daughter." The woman greeted him with a handshake. There was something warm and captivating about that smile. "They must have you here in a black body. But don't be afraid. I'm not going to bite you. Let's just talk a bit, play some games." "What kind of games do you like, darling?" Every time the invasion of guests ended, John felt an emptiness inside. On the one hand, he felt flattered that his orphanage for 100 children was the best, if not in the world, then in the country. From there, the underprivileged children leave prepared for life, if not completely, then at least in many ways. After all, What is the main disadvantage of orphanages? John would ask audiences at meetings and seminars, telling them about the advantages of his idea. They don't teach anything. The caregivers cook, clean, wash, and iron clothes, solve everyday problems. The result is not an adult, but a big child. What a profound idea, someone exclaimed, and the director nodded. He loved it when his words resonated with the audience. John knew the subject inside out because he himself had grown up in an orphanage. Years of life that he wouldn't mind erasing from his memory haunted him. Dirty food, hard beds, violence in abundance. He had become as hard as a crust of bread and just as rancid. At the same time, he set out to create another orphanage where things would be different. After all, unlike most of his peers, he didn't start drinking, he didn't go to jail, and he didn't become homeless. John still remembered how, as a green educator, he presented his project to a large committee with trepidation. "The orphanage I'm looking at," he said at the time, "it's not an orphanage at all. It's just a home, a place where the adults look after the little ones, where the children cook, clean, and wash, and they learn. I'm convinced that after a home like this, everyone will have a family." "And where are you going to get the funding from?" a boss asked contemptuously, not even bothering to change the "you." John hadn't tolerated disrespect for himself since he was young, but he was still forced to let such attacks pass his ears. "I have an idea," he hissed that time, "but I don't know which way to go, so as not to be rude." It was his militant attitude that caught the eye of a completely different official, who a year later gave permission for the risky project. And he never regretted his choice. The Blackbird became an emblematic project, which he would like to record in his achievements for all kinds of authorities and politicians. At the time, John, a teacher who had graduated 7 years previously, had no management experience. He didn't know what accounting was or where food and basic necessities came from in a budget institution. But in his ideal orphanage, he saw a very different hierarchy, with only one boss. That was what really mattered to John. Just him, his mothers, and the junior staff. And the hottest idea, approved at the top, was to manage the orphans' finances. After all, not all the boys and girls were beggars like the church mice. Some had real estate behind them, others had their parents' wealth. The patron himself gathered into his orphanage a number of children who, at first glance, were not needed by anyone. But thanks to them, there was a sum of money in the institution's accounts that could be used in Merlot's interests. Everything was going well: honor, respect, financial resources that one can only dream of. But yesterday, "This is unprecedented," he shouted, sitting in his office. "Unheard of." "No way," exclaimed John to who knows who. "These rich newcomers want to take my little princess." His goal, to which he has dedicated 5 years of his life, and will dedicate even more, it was for her that he gave up his career, even temporarily. It was for her that he invented new ways of teaching. And how did Martha repay him? Total betrayal. Blackbird was different from other orphanages. For example, it had its own bus that took the children on excursions or to the lake in the summer. John managed to negotiate with celebrities, actors, musicians, bloggers who would visit the orphanage and work with the children. Not as often as he would have liked, but it was better than nothing. However, Martha had nothing to compare it to. She had always lived here, for as long as she could remember. "What were you talking to them about?" asked the principal menacingly. "Answer me quickly." "I don't remember," Martha admitted honestly. "She was my aunt, and me, after your lesson." She couldn't string 2 words together, to be honest. The principal blushed and started to swallow, just as she had done yesterday. But she quickly pulled herself together and continued her questioning. "I hope you haven't told them our secret," said John, and in his voice the girl heard unusual notes. "Are you afraid?" "No," replied Martha. "Of course he's not. He doesn't remember anything." "He doesn't remember anything?" "Yes, I remember. We certainly didn't talk about you," said Martha. "It's all right. Behave yourself. Don't ever go near that woman again, do you hear me?" "Why?" The girl was surprised. "She said she wanted to take me away." "Take me away? Can you imagine?" She wanted to tell the principal that she hoped to have her own home. She could already see her own room. Very small, just enough for a bed, a table, and a cupboard for toys and clothes. But it would be enough for her. not too much to make her happy, but the principal wasn't willing to listen to her, let alone share her hopes of happiness. Suppressing the urge to scream and shout, John began to laugh. He picked Martha up, put her on his lap, and began to tell her how entreating adults were, how they gave her hope, filled her young heart with expectations, and then betrayed her. It sounded convincing because the principal of the school is a very experienced man and understands literally everything. But why? The girl asked, crying. But why? What did I do to make you betray me? You didn't do anything, but that's what it's all about. They betray you just because they can, replied the principal with a smile, wiping away the orphan's tears. Come on, repeat after me, little girl. And he began to repeat the words, which sent shivers down Marta's spine. But suddenly she felt good and calm, and began to say what John wanted her to say. Even without the pill, Anthony believed that he had never really loved, and that there was no room in his heart for any life feelings. What's more, he'd had a bad experience in his life when he got married, but he wasn't rich enough for his wife. She constantly reproached him for his service in the organs, his constant absences and obligations on holidays, his derisory salary. And when Anthony was ready to be fired, she packed her bags and left. So he was left without a job and without the woman he loved. Then Selena was his salvation. And now he had to throw himself headlong into the maelstrom or disappear from her life. Which was the right thing to do, he still hadn't decided. It took him 3 days to understand the information he had received at the orphanage. Then a little longer to get more. His first boss and mentor in life always said, "He who has the information dominates the situation." This John guy seems strange to me, frankly, said Anthony, sipping his coffee. And oddly enough, I decided to do some research on him. But I'm thinking, which way to dig? You're very positive. What did you find out? Asked Selena impatiently. She admired her man, his intelligence, and his altruism. Well, I won't bore you too much. I analyzed the case from a financial point of view, explained the private detective. And believe it or not, it's a very strange orphanage. Very strange. What's so strange about it? Asked Selena. According to reports, once a year the children eat black caviar and scallops. They also eat oysters, mussels, and prawns. They can't help but live wonderfully. In recent years, this pal, John, bought the orphanage an expensive bus, a telescope, a whole collection of machines. Should I go on? I don't know what you're getting at, dear. Selena shrugged her shoulders. I don't understand anything. I don't think all these delicacies and other goodies reach the orphanage, she said. They just deduct it, like many other expenses. See, doesn't that tell me something? Get it straight, Selena, said the detective. If I'm going to risk my license, if I'm going to investigate this, I have to make sure you're not hiding anything from me. And it looks like you are. I swear I'm not, the girl almost shouted resentfully. Where do you get these ideas? I'll explain, said Anthony, and reached for a cigarette. Then he remembered that his wife didn't like tobacco smoke and immediately threw the packet on the table. The question is, where did this John get the money for so much entertainment? Finances that can be obtained from somewhere and then spent on luxuries or written off, so to speak. From where? Asked Selena. Anthony scratched his chin thoughtfully. Either his wife really didn't know anything, or she was feigning surprise. However, in the 6 months they had been together, he had gotten to know her inside and out, and she was a terrible liar. And she was a terrible liar. Should he believe her? His niece, this Myrtle Martha, has a huge inheritance, the detective explained. John can't use it directly, but he has the right to dispose of it for the benefit of his ward. I wouldn't have memorized that, the lawyers explained. Inheritance. Selena began to rummage through her memory. Right? Why hadn't she thought of that? She and Maddie had lost their mother at an early age. Their different fathers had looked after them, but without fanaticism. None of their relatives would have left them enough capital to buy buses, telescopes, and black caviar. The inheritance must have gone to Maddie's husband. He was a strange and mysterious man. She knew nothing about him. Maddie hid him, just as she hid her little daughter. Understand, Anthony, Selena said with a sigh. I just want to keep Myrtle for myself. Or Martha, whatever you call her. I don't care now. I love this girl very much. And I don't give a damn about her money, no matter how much it is. Let that John, as you call him, take the money and choke on it. We'll go back to Washington, paint with Myrtle, teach her to skate. Wouldn't that be nice, Anthony? Okay, you've convinced me, smiled the detective. Well, or I want to believe it myself. Only, if we're in the game, we'll go all the way, and we won't leave a penny for that director. And money, you know, can be put to good use. What do you mean by that? Selena was surprised. Do you need money? Anthony, we don't need anything. My paintings sell. You have clients. Is it too much for a man to be happy? You realize it's not about me. It's a question of principles. Why should your niece's money end up in the pockets of some crooks when there are those who really deserve it? I don't understand where you're going with this. He shook his head. Fear not, my dear. I have a plan. I've thought it over. I've consulted lawyers. What kind of plan? I'm sure you'll like the beginning, Anthony said and knelt down in front of Selena. Angelica valued her time, literally every minute of it. For 10 years of her life, she had worked towards her goal of becoming a lawyer. First, 5 years of intense study at university. Then, 3 years of hard work as a bailiff. After all, it's the most disgusting place in the world, especially if you're at the bottom of the system. Writing briefs, sending subpoenas, listening to endless complaints on the phone. Then came 2 years at the bar and trying to pass the bar exam. And when her dream came true, Angelica realized how little time she had left to enjoy life and reach the top of her profession. Over the last 10 years, she has not only developed, but also become a better person. Angelica valued her time, so her rates could be described as democratic. Quite the opposite, the prices were very authoritarian. But there was a simple explanation. Angelica approached every situation with a maniacal desire to win. She would use any method to achieve her goal, and she always won. Why did you choose me? She asked, looking at the lovely blonde. There was something creative about her. Her eyes, her hair, her mannerisms. It's not my specialty. It was recommended to me, shrugged the client. They said you were the only one who could handle such a complicated case. They said you were the best lawyer. Lawyer, she corrected with a smile. She didn't like her profession being called the man's word, but that didn't change the matter, unfortunately. Family disputes are a gray area of justice. Many of the things you can read about in clever books don't actually work, or don't actually work. Angelica was not willing to give up her work, an interesting new case in which she can demonstrate erudition and creativity. What could be better? She was only increasing her price. A lawyer always does this to show his clients his own importance. And she also didn't like those colleagues who, from the very first minutes, radiated confidence in success. No, luck loves not only the prepared, but also the cautious. On the contrary, it is necessary to sow total hopelessness in the client's soul. Then victory will really be desirable for them. In jurisprudence, you can never be 100% sure of anything. No two disputes are the same, which means that something can go wrong at any time. Well, said Angelica, after reading the documents, the case seems hopeless. You realize that if the educational institution has denied you custody since the beginning of the process, it seems a bit presumptuous to go to court. I've got a trump card up my sleeve, said the man Angelica had taken for a security guard wordlessly. He looked very solid, like an Italian gangster or a successful businessman from the 90s. Not even one trump card, but several. Well, friend, said the lawyer with a tone of irritation, all the trump cards must be on my desk, and then I'll tell you myself which ones can be used and which ones can't. You see, Selena tried to ease the tension. We have a suspicion that Martha is my niece, so do a DNA test. Angelica shrugged. My God, we live in the 21st century. It's so easy. We've already consulted experts, said Selena. Look, my dead sister Maddie, Myrtle's mother. Martha was my half-sister. We have different fathers, and in this situation, a DNA test. What did they say, Anthony? The test might not be informative. The man helped her. Angelica wondered. She had faced a similar situation not long ago and knew from experience that it wasn't easy to prove paternity in this case. What's more, it wouldn't always serve as an unconditional basis for handing the child over to the supposed relative. He wondered what other advantage was available. The case was beginning to interest him more and more. You see, said Selena, we went to John's house to negotiate. He was the one who invited us. And he said things that were hard to believe. We don't know how they usually take children into custody, but something doesn't add up. What happened in there? Asked the lawyer. She thought she should give her new clients a quote before getting carried away with the story and was persuaded to reduce her fee. I'll tell you everything. On New Year's Eve, the Blackbird Orphanage looked beautiful. The main entrance was decorated with Christmas trees, garlands, colorful ribbons, and reindeer figures. The children molded a real Santa Claus out of snow and painted him with red and blue paint. The orphanage was used as an amulet by staff at all levels to assure the higher authorities that the child protection work was being done at the right level. Did you enjoy it? John asked his guest and smiled as sincerely as he could. Yes, replied Selena. My husband and I thought it over. We want to keep custody of Marta. We love her, don't we, Anthony? Yes, he nodded, very much. Oh, I wouldn't advise that, said the director thoughtfully. Why would you young people want to ruin your lives with a problem child? You know, I've been through so many children and foster parents that I can quickly tell if everything will go according to plan. Your orphanage should be first class. That's why he held his talks with current and future guardians and adopters not in the corridor on a bench, but in a real meeting room, which he organized at the expense of sponsors' funds. A neat white table, soft armchairs, air conditioning, a fridge with clean water all contributed to productive communication. John believed he could convince anyone of his righteousness. And in such a favorable environment, Mr. Director, said Selene, holding back an internal explosion of anger. We're not saying that we have to welcome you into our family now. We are outsiders, as you noted on the open day, but we're not short of money. We've rented an apartment here, bought a crib. Anthony is already looking for work. He's in demand. Oh, young and green. Look, it's not about material objects. El Merlo has the best facilities in the country, I assure you. The children have everything, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to give them more. It's not necessary. Martha is just a very difficult child. The director was silent for a moment, as if savoring his own words. You know, I have a special sentimental feeling for her. She came here when Blackbird was only 6 months old. What happened to her parents? Asked Selena. Don't ask. The director dismissed her. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you. You know we can't divulge confidential information. Well, Martha literally grew up in my arms. When I built this house, I was young and romantic. I felt I could replace a family for the little ones. Thank you for your candor, she interrupted, but I still don't have an answer. Don't interrupt, listen to me, demanded the director. No respect. So in all the years I've watched Martha grow up, oh, there's no optimism. She has no friends. She has no hobbies. She has no interest in anything. As you can see, she can barely speak. I'm afraid he'll need constant supervision, even after he comes of age. Are you prepared for that? You won't come running back to me in 6 months and ask me to go back to the way things were before. We're not afraid of difficulties, Selena interrupted him. I really don't know how to convince you, I swear, but we're willing to work with Marta. She's got me so hooked, right, Anthony? Ah, smiled John. He saw that soft persuasion wasn't working and decided to use hard power. You think you've come to this place and can buy everything? Well, you should know that there are some things that aren't for sale. And one of those things is my goodwill with Mom and Dad. If you want to be Martha's guardians, my answer is no. There was silence. If Anthony was prepared for such an event, it was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over Selena. Suddenly, she felt cold and shivered. The man held her hand with the wedding ring, but even that had no calming effect. Let's go to court, whispered the girl. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. We'll complain everywhere. Everywhere. Do what you want, the principal waved his hand. Complain where? In the media? The information is confidential. I've said that many times. If the story goes public, you won't be able to welcome a child into your life. Not just welcome a child, but set foot in the door of the orphanage. You've thought of everything, Selena whispered again. But why? Oh, don't try to flatter me. However, I am an educator and an experienced one. That's why I'm offering you something more. Listen to me. Listen to me carefully. I won't suggest it again. Martha recalled the events of that strange day and realized that she had to give her white-haired aunt a chance. Yes, she could betray. And yes, she could give hope first and throw it away later. To know whether she would do the right thing or not, you had to trust her. That's what Martha was going to do. A week after meeting her beautiful aunt, who had told her so much about her home and her family, Martha became very ill. She literally went to bed. On the first night, the temperature rose to 40 degrees, and her ecstatic mother even wanted to call an ambulance. But Juan strictly forbade her to do so. He ordered measures to quarantine her cell, not to let anyone out for 3 days, not to use telephones. What's wrong with telephones? The teacher asked himself. They're children. They sit on their phones all the time. They eat, they even go to the toilet. And when you call, they don't pick up the phone. They don't listen. Tell me, have you ever heard of tick-tock-tock? Asked John in his arrogant voice. Well, replied the teacher. You don't want a video of sick children from Blackbird, as they say. Go viral? Become a trend? The mother educator closed her eyes. Tick-tock, of course, she had already heard, but the rest of the witty words she didn't know. However, from the principal's tone, the correct answer was becoming obvious. No, of course not, she replied. I don't want viruses or anything like that. Sir. John helped her. Director. Unlike his subordinate, he didn't seem scared. And not just because a short-term rise in temperature above 40 degrees wasn't dangerous for the child's health. It was because so far everything was going exactly according to plan. And John liked it when he didn't just control a situation, he controlled it. After waiting a week after the unfortunate conversation with the arrogant blonde and her idiot, the principal ordered an outdoor physical education class. And right afterwards, he gave Martha blueberry ice cream, her favorite treat. The main thing now was not to overdo it, to monitor the girl's condition. She better be sick for a month, no less. She took a nursing course at the Pedagogical University. With them, he managed to work part-time in the afternoons and evenings at the local hospital as a stretcher bearer. Excellent experience, although the work is disgusting. However, as young John didn't ask his temporary colleagues to call him a nurse, they didn't listen to his requests. Even on his work permit, they wrote his profession as a nurse with derision. He could forgive the disrespect then, but not now. He took Martha to the medical isolation room, listened to the girl with his own stethoscope. No wheezing, normal lungs. Just the flu. He remembered the unfortunate conversation with Selena and tried to figure out what he had done wrong. I'm an educator, and I hope that my name will be written in golden letters in the history of pedagogy, he told himself. So I intend to take another child from my orphanage. You see, his name is Carlos. He's a golden boy, intelligent, obedient, with no congenital diseases or malformations. And he has. John looked carefully at Anthony. He has eyes like your man's. We don't need another baby, Selena interrupted him. We've come for Martha and we're going with her. You need to understand something important, John said in the driest voice possible. The Blackbird is me, and I alone decide who leaves here and when. I'll give Martha a negative opinion on your application, shrugged the director, and you'll leave here the same way you came in. The conversation ended. Then he got up from his chair and left the meeting room. The hidden video camera was still recording the situation, and Celine seemed ready to say what she thought about the director's intransigence. At least that's what John was counting on. But the Muzzy did the strangest thing. He put his arm around his wife and kissed her warmly, a furtive move. The director took Martha's temperature again. It's a bit high, 40 degrees. It needs to be lowered. He mixed Analgin and other ingredients, prepared a triple and treated the girl's thigh. He liked her, a very pretty little princess, and he wasn't willing to share her with anyone. The injection was painful. Although John held Martha, she was still squirming violently. Don't be afraid, darling. I'm here for you, he told her. I'll never leave you. Do you hear me? Yes. The conversation with the lawyer had given Selena timid hope. Of course, she wanted to hear that the woman would solve all of her problems and give her the results she wanted. But the lawyer was measured in her predictions. Should she look for another specialist or hire two at once? Unfortunately, her financial resources were not unlimited. If you use your money so thoughtlessly, you'll quickly run out of it. Are we really husband and wife now? Asked Selena as they left Angelica's office. Of course we are, smiled Anthony. But tell me honestly, does a stamp in your passport mean anything to you? Of course it does, said the girl enthusiastically. If it didn't mean anything, would you shy away from it like the devil from incense? Anthony remained silent. Both the first and the second time, he had married impulsively, without the slightest fear of that same stamp in the passport. Only his ex-wife wanted a lavish wedding. In an effort to please her, he, a green lieutenant, rented an entire hall in the restaurant, hired a photographer, musicians, a host, and even released balloons into the sky. He went into debt and spent a year refusing everything to pay for it. The first marriage fell apart like a circle in water. He had nothing left, no children, not even a faint sense of happiness. The second marriage was much more to his liking. He would sign it, receive a certificate, and then he could leave. And something told the private investigator that this union had a better chance of a favorable outcome. "Let's think about it," suggested the private investigator. "They're not stamps. We have to think it through, answer all the questions like a sheet of paper. Love to portray the purest and most sincere. Well, you and I are good at that." "Have you ever been to court?" asked Selena. Anthony wrinkled his nose. He remembered how, during their service, they not only caught criminals, but also had to prove that they had broken the law. More than once or twice, he had literally been summoned and interrogated into unconsciousness. How they got to the offender, how they arrested him, whether they rid him his rights. The most frustrating thing was when Anthony's answers didn't satisfy the judge or prosecutor. Then the offender could be acquitted and he, the operator, deprived of a bonus or even another post. "Yes, I've been there," said Anthony. "I'll tell you what, the main thing in a trial is not to talk too much, only what they want to hear from you." "How do I know what they want to hear?" asked Selena. "Angela will certainly explain everything to us, and she'll tell us." "Angela?" The girl was indignant. "Is that what you call her? Do you know her?" "I'm sorry, dear." "No, let's talk about this later, so there's no confusion," said Anthony. "It's okay. I'm not offended. I call all the women who play on our side family. Understand? Besides, putting you and her side by side, well, the choice is obvious, I guess." Selena now felt bad for having raised her voice to her husband. She still didn't understand how he had dared to ask her to marry him. And not only had he asked her to marry him, he had also arranged the wedding for the following day. Of course, she had imagined the wedding differently. A fancy dress, veil, guests, photographer. But really, who could she call? She had no friends here, no family. "Anthony, you came into my life like a lottery win. I'm going to worry all the time that I've won you by mistake, or that you've been stolen. Do you believe that?" The private detective was embarrassed by the sentimentality, and in his previous job, he was used to hiding his emotions. You always have to be the brave, strong guy who wins, no matter what. And stress is relieved with alcohol or by running around Washington at night. "I had to get used to a new, respectable, exemplary way of life. I want you and me to talk about it," he said, "and think about whether Angelica, needs to know." "What's it about?" she asked. "While we were there, I went out for a smoke. Can you believe this orphanage has a smoking room? For guests with pipes, no less. But I was doing some work. I talked to one of the employees. And what did she say? She thought I was a policeman, so she confessed me as a priest. It doesn't sound very believable, but then why would she lie to me?" The disease was disgusting. It was as if Marta was in a whirlpool, came to the surface and sank again. Sometimes the high fever would pass and she would feel almost fine. Then the illness would return with renewed vigor, trapping her in bed. Martha didn't worry for a second about not going to class, about not seeing the other girls and students. The white-haired woman, whose name she whispered in delirium, was another matter. Selene, for some reason, he seemed strangely familiar and known to her. It was also very difficult for her because none of her classmates came to support her. They didn't even give her a note. The school principal forbade her to use her phone and tablet. He said it was harmful during an illness like this. Only her mother looked in on her every hour or two, touched her forehead and sighed. But John himself was always around and in a very good mood. For the first few days, he literally slept in the bed next to her, taking her temperature twice a night. He gave her unpleasant syrups and powders, brought her freshly prepared blueberry bites. He helped her to the toilet. Thank God she didn't go into forbidden territory. He was very involved and polite in a way she had never seen him before. "I'll never leave you," John said. "I'll always be with you." These words, which in another situation would have made her shudder, were appropriate this time. It turned out that the director knew the various pills and injections as well as a doctor. On the third day, however, the doctor came to see her and praised John for his treatment. "It's obviously the flu," he said. "We need to watch your temperature and lower it if it rises above 38.5 degrees Celsius. Throat rinses, lots of water, antiviral capsules." "Doctor," Martha sniffled, "how long am I going to be ill?" "God willing, you'll be fine by the 5th day," smiled the doctor. "Listen to John. You'd be lost without him. What a mentor. Blackbird is very lucky to have such a wonderful owner living and working here." Martha didn't ask the question about the duration of her illness out of curiosity. She was just trying to find out how many days Selena, her new mother, would wait for her. Perhaps a week would be enough for her. But what about 2? What about 3? There's no way of knowing for sure. Adults can act like children sometimes. If you stay here in total isolation for more than a week, you'll see all kinds of reactions. Selena must think Martha is a rude and arrogant child for not calling or writing to her. However, she didn't know her future mother's phone number. "John," whispered the girl when the principal returned to his makeshift room, "where's Selena? Did she ask for me?" "Did you remember her name?" shouted the man, which startled Martha, but she pulled herself together. "Of course I did. He walked past the children like kittens at a fair. This one is small, and this one has angry eyes. A terrible woman. That's why I expelled her." This news made Martha feel worse. She had another high fever that didn't go away for a week. When she recovered, she was so exhausted that she could only eat porridge with a spoon and drink it with sour cream. The memory of the beautiful white-haired woman now seemed like a dream. John, on the other hand, was much more understanding. She was even willing to forgive his constant insults and strange activities. She was also willing to wait for her mother to see her again. After all, she is only 8 years old. Now she's going to study hard, do math and geography, learn to write poetry, and act in the next play, of course. Then there will be no shortage of potential fathers. Selena was in court for the first time. Angelica convinced her that they needed to act quickly, and then they would have at least a small chance of success. Selena sent several letters and packages to the orphanage. She created an exemplary Facebook page, and yet to go to court. Selena always thought it was a very dark place where hopes and dreams were destroyed. She had no idea what the sessions were like or what to say or why the judges wore such ridiculous robes. When they met in court on the day of the hearing, Angelica was in a very good mood. She felt like a fish in water in this state house. "You don't know how lucky we are," said the lawyer. "The hearing was scheduled just 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. I don't think they're going to postpone the decision either." She didn't mention that she had to use any force. Other cases have taken months to resolve without any hope of speed. But her clients, by some strange coincidence, were always lucky. Selena was afraid. If the decision was made in the next few days, what if it wasn't in her favor? "What should we say?" asked Selena. "How should we behave?" "I'll do the talking," said Angelica, her tone sounding a little arrogant. "If they ask you questions, think about what the judge wants to hear. You are a positive family with no bad habits. The husband is an excellent policeman, now retired. Your mother is an artist. You don't have to accuse anyone of anything or make anything up." Okay. 2 weeks ago, the lawyer also met with Anthony and heard his story about what might be going on at the orphanage. Ah, what a man. Angelica's personal life was not going well. She's now 39 and female happiness hasn't found her. Well, some are lucky in love and others are lucky in their careers. John was in front of the judge's chambers and looked well. The lawyer noted that his suit cost no more than $200,000. Expensive cufflinks, elegant belt. The overall look spoiled the belt bag, so popular in the 90s. It wasn't clear why he had put it in his impeccable suit. "It's not a strange taste," Angelica said, as if she were speaking to the void. "It's the total absence of it." "Did you say something?" asked John. He realized that he was polite, courteous, and even attractive. "I told you that you're probably the legendary director of Blackbird," smiled Angelica. "I've heard a lot about you." "Merci," replied John. "And you're going to represent the same madman I denied custody of one of my wards?" The lawyer nodded. He didn't want to continue the conversation and waste his energy. Nor could he stand the delay of a hearing. Therefore, he requested that the trials involving him be held in the morning. The case was entrusted to Silverstova, a judge with long experience. She had already attended his trials. Her feelings were mixed. The clerk said aloud, and Angelica immediately showed her identity and the court order. Please report to courtroom 4. Selena, who was in court for the first time, was impressed by the layout of the courtroom. High ceilings, a counter like in American movies, beautiful benches. Near the judge's table, the prosecutor was sitting lazily. An elderly man who was almost leaning back in his chair. Was all this immense hall for his little case? A matter like that could well have been resolved in a tiny room. John, on the other hand, seemed fine in such an environment. He organized his papers, put his clipboard face down in front of him, and hung up the phone. He looked at Selena and Anthony and gave the ugliest smile he could muster. A separate door opened for the judge. She entered the courtroom and sat down in the high chair. The prosecutor stood at attention and the other participants also stood up. The trial began. Parties, we are hearing the case behind closed doors, said the judge. Photographs and video recordings are prohibited, and for revealing information, you can be prosecuted. The prosecutor won't lie. Returning to the team was made all the more difficult by the fact that Harry had been taken to an orphanage, the same naughty girl who is now 10 years old. He set up a social media page where he happily posted pictures of his new life. Here's his beautiful room. Here are the toys her new parents gave her, even though they're not age appropriate. Hello, Martha, said Harry when they called the video. Are you feeling better? I don't know, Martha replied. It all happened so quickly. You and the family. Don't worry, they'll take you too, the former classmate said confidently. The most important thing is that you hold your line. How did that happen? And he told the incredible story of his departure to this family. When the volunteers and guests arrived, Harry hid on the second floor out of habit. He had done this for several years, after losing hope of finding a family. There he sat at his tablet, lazily scrolling through his social media feed. Suddenly, a couple approached him. It's like we're on the same page, you know, Harry said enthusiastically. We understand each other like nobody's business. They're computer scientists. Martha didn't know what that was, but she was pleased with her partner. The conversation with her had taken a lot of energy out of her, and she had to lie down on the bed to get some rest. Classes had started a long time ago, and once again, she had missed them. So she would fall behind again in math, geography, and English. She sat down at the table, picked up the textbooks, and started reading them. And if something wasn't clear to him, he looked up a video lesson on YouTube and tried to solve the problem. It turned out that the internet wasn't just full of funny videos and crazy pictures. The guys and girls on the screen could explain any subject just as well as their teachers. And now she finally understood fractions, even though her math teacher had tried very hard to convey these mysteries to her. Excited, Martha didn't even realize that she had been studying for 2 hours. Soon, she would not only catch up with the class, but surpass it. The important thing was to be diligent. And then they would probably take her to a foster home, if they took Harry at all. Suddenly, Martha felt so sad that she started to cry. It turns out that here in the orphanage, everyone is a competitor. The boys and girls have to do everything they can to be taken into foster care. Is that why she has to study so hard for herself or for her future parents? Mom appeared at the classroom door. Ah, there you are, Martha. The woman was suffering, seeing her pupil's illness, so she wanted to cheer her up. Don't cry. I'm going to tell you something you won't believe, and I'm sure you'll feel better in no time. Selena's judicial mind was scrambled in her head. She remembered everything that had happened during the first half of the day in fragments. Here the judge read the case file and asked if it supported his allegations. Here came the defense lawyer and made a fiery speech about how his confidants wanted to do their bit to eradicate the institution of orphanhood. Here John's objections were heard. Then each of them was subjected to questions, the prosecutor being the most diligent. Tell me, he said to Selena, why did you choose this child? Why do you want custody of her? Your Honor, let me answer, said Angelica, and without waiting for permission, she spoke immediately. The question is somewhat sentimental, but still. My confidant had a sister. After her death, she tried for a long time to find traces of her niece Myrta Lansky. And then by chance, while visiting another orphanage, he discovered Martha Lansky. That's an interesting coincidence. The judge was surprised. Was it about proving parentage? Your Honor, said the lawyer, the girl spent 6 long years in an orphanage. Any drastic measure can traumatize a child's psyche. That's why my confidence decided to take things one step at a time. First to establish friendship, and then to confirm kinship. If they develop a strong friendship. Besides, the child knows nothing beyond the orphanage. Leaving him quickly could be painful. Reasonable, the judge agreed. So let's ask the thrush question. Tell me, representative of the defendant, have you tried to find the child's relatives? As part of standard procedure, John replied, I have 100 male and female students, and that's without taking dynamics into account. And I don't have an extra specialist on staff to deal with correspondence and such nonsense. The judge nodded and made a note on her papers. After that, the woman in the row spent a long time reading characterizations, looking at photographs, reading certificates. Celine had the impression that the judge was looking at her with a maternal sadness. At least she would like to believe that. Will there be any additions? Asked the judge. That's right, said the Blackbird director. I know that Martha is only 8 years old and that by law, her opinion shouldn't be taken into account when resolving disputes of this kind. But I would still ask you to read the letter written by my pupil and attach it to the file. Ignoring the secretary, John himself approached the judge, and she even had to hit him with a gavel out of decency. Actually, the secretary works with us, he said, pointing to the girl in front of the computer. All the paperwork has to go through her, and the other participants in the process can familiarize themselves with the documents. Sorry, shrugged the principal. I'm just a teacher, not a lawyer. And in my work, I think first and foremost of the children's welfare, not all these legal hoops. The judge sighed, picked up the letter in the child's sparse handwriting and began to read it aloud. Some sentences seemed very mature to Selena. After a minute, she wanted to jump up and run out of the courtroom, but Anthony grabbed her arm. Tears streamed down her face. Among the children's texts, Selena had only memorized a few sentences. Merlot, this is my second home. Here I am loved, accepted, and welcomed. John didn't approve of the guardians, and he's like a father to me. Please don't hand me over to them, comrade judge. A break, thundered the judge. A rest break. We'll continue after lunch. Martha couldn't believe her ears. After all, John had fooled her once again, and Selena had not only wanted to take her away, but had also decided to go on trial. What that was, the girl only knew in outline. It must be a place where evil directors are forced to hand over their children to their mothers and fathers if they really want them. But why? Marta asked the teacher's mother. Why did she do that? Don't ask, the woman waved her hand. What are we? Little people with no intelligence, and John is the boss. Look at the orphanage he built. I drove miles to work here. I still don't understand, Martha said. There's nothing to understand. The teacher waved her hand. I see you're doing math here, aren't you? That's nice. All I'd seen before on the children's tablets were endless videos, games, and silly quizzes. One boy in their group, who had been taken in a long time ago, was reading books and playing chess. But that was the exception to the rule. Looking at Martha, he realized that she didn't belong there either. She was very different from the other girls. Martha, do you remember anything about yourself? The teacher asked the girl to keep her occupied. About your mother and father? Where do you come from? Martha began to search her memory. Sometimes images came to mind. A big stuffed hare, a tall cradle, and the black car in which she had been taken. She didn't understand where it had all gone. John said that if you were feeling well, you should go and see him, said the teacher, her eyes downcast. I can't go, asked Martha. Can you tell I'm still ill? You know, my dear, that it's a sin to deceive adults. Besides, the principal will find out anyway. Go on. He won't do anything so bad to you. Go on, go on. So Martha thought about going to see him, but not to take part in his stupid lesson. No, she would try to find out everything. Why he was here, why he had taken Aunt Selena, and how long she would be stuck in the Blackbird. After the break, Selena regained her composure and remembered well the events that had followed. Despite her downcast mood, Angelica explained, everything was fine. In some unknown way, she could read the judge's mood and deduce whether he was in agreement or not. I don't want to get his hopes up, she smiled. but the position of this blue sparrow is very weak. What do you mean? Asked Selena. He's concerned about child protection, explained the lawyer. But what kind of childhood is there in this orphanage? Just an imitation. Family is something else. Anthony, did you take your trump card out of your pocket? Yes, her husband nodded, waiting there at the end of the corridor, reading the papers. Did that crow see you? No, Anthony replied. He sees nothing but his beak. Once again, jealousy squeezed Selena's heart. In fact, while she and Angelica were drinking coffee and puffing away, Anthony had gone off somewhere. She thought it was to smoke, and it turns out that they have their own secrets. But the girl knew how to contain herself and didn't start finding out about the relationship. After all, she could do that a bit later. The session continued. After lunch, the judge clearly looked more satisfied and relaxed. He went through the papers once more, clarified some of the parties' questions, and was clearly deciding whether there was enough evidence to close the trial. As if out of the blue, "Is there anything else the parties would like to add?" asked the judge. "Let the record show that it is inadmissible to refer to evidence that was not the subject of the trial in the complaints." "Your Honor," said the lawyer in her expensive voice, "before we proceed with the debate and you retire to the deliberation room, the complainant has a motion." "Yes," said the judge. "We propose." "No, we request the examination of a witness whose testimony could play a key role in resolving this case." He pronounced the name, and the director nervously adjusted his tie. "Objection," he shouted. "Objection." "Order." The judge called order and banged her gavel. The plaintiff hadn't finished reading her motion. "Your Honor," the lawyer continued, "the presence of the witness has been guaranteed, and in order to preserve certain aspects of privacy, I request that the witness be examined in the absence of the parties." "Objection," John shouted again. "This is a flagrant violation of a child's rights. How can they question this decrepit old woman in my absence?" The court decided to grant the motion in part. The judge said, "Question the witness in the presence of the plaintiff and the defendant." Betty entered the courtroom. She had come a long way and her strength was almost gone. The concierge approached the bench and squinted, trying to see through the veil of her advanced age to the judge in his big black robe. "Do you know who I am and where you are?" Betty intervened. "Yes, I think so. I'll tell you everything, the whole story." The director of the orphanage turned pale and clung to the desk with both hands, as if the whole world was collapsing. 2 days before the fateful court hearing, his subordinates had already stabbed John in the back. And to think that he, the writer and director of the play called Blackbird, had been betrayed in the most insidious way. Now all his efforts to build a relationship of trust with Martha were in vain. And if she found out that he had adopted her name and surname, "You won't be judged," shouted the principal. "I'll fire the teacher's mother, I swear, as soon as I find a replacement for her." And to think she disobeyed his orders. He told Martha that not only had Selena not given up her little treasure, she had also gone to court. She'd hired a lawyer, that woman in the suit. No, she won't give up without a fight. And as long as the girl is in her power, it's too soon to give up. "Write a resignation," the director demanded it. "Write that you're not going anywhere, or you know what will happen." "I'm not going to do that," Martha insisted. "I love my mother very much. We had tea and talked. Today I did math." "You've only seen her once," John said. "You've known me all my life. Have I ever lied to you? Have I ever betrayed you?" Martha asked herself. Yes, the principal had been polite and kind to her, although sometimes harsh. But what did she really know about him? "I don't agree," said the girl. "I can't fool anyone, John." And then the principal decided to change tactics. If Martha was no longer afraid of brute force, why not outsmart her? "Tell you what," he asked. "You know I can't lose this trial." "Well, that's the kind of man I am. Let the judge say no, and I'll let this woman in here any time of day. I'll let her draw with you. What do you think?" "Are you really not going to cheat me?" the girl asked hopefully. "Of course I won't." After those words, she thought, it's better to have a tit up your sleeve than a crane in the sky. Sitting down at the principal's huge desk, she wrote down on a white sheet of paper everything he dictated to her, without a single error or mistake. After rereading the text, the principal smiled with his lips and put the piece of paper in his briefcase. "And now, shall we start the lesson now?" "I don't want to." Let's just reinforce what we've already learned, smiled the principal. Betty leaned against the door and couldn't believe her eyes. There he was, the golden man. There he was, the exceptional and innovative educator, putting a little girl on his lap and saying such terrible things to her. The cleaner's heart squeezed, so ashamed and hurt by what was happening. When you grow up, you'll be mine, John told her. We were made for each other. I've made up my mind. As soon as you turn 17, we'll apply for a marriage license. Do you hear me? Martha remained silent. Tears streamed down her face. Every girl her age already knew what a registry office, a wedding, a bride, and a groom were. But was this principal really her future husband? Would she have to live with him until she died? You're mine. You're mine. You're mine. You're mine, Guan said in a chant, as if he was going into some kind of trance. I'm yours, Marta repeated with tears streaming down her face. I am yours. 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 This strange mantra continued for at least 15 minutes. Carefully, she moved away from the door and, dragging her feet, went to the officer's room to get ready to go home. The principal was so absorbed in his next lesson that he didn't even hear her footsteps. There was silence in the room. The eyes of the prosecutor, the judge, and the lawyer were fixed on the janitor. The principal's burgundy face was an eloquent indication that Betty's words could well be true. Hey, that's unheard of, whispered the woman in the cloak. Here's a cross for you, granddaughter, shouted the cleaner and made the sign of the cross. And when John finally pulled himself together and got up from his chair to argue, he was rudely interrupted. Adjourned, said the judge, and looked expressively at the prosecutor. The hearing will continue the day after tomorrow at 10 o'clock. As soon as the judge went to her separate door, John began to quickly gather up the papers and put the expensive clipboard into his leather briefcase. The prosecutor came running up to him with a speed unprecedented for his size and age. Where are you going? He asked. I need to talk to you urgently. Let's say I need to ask you a few questions. About what? The director replied. I'm not answering any questions. Guess what? Shouted the prosecutor. He was holding John's forearm tightly with his left hand and dialing someone on the phone with his right. Their struggle didn't last long. At some point, the director leaned back in his chair and rested his head on the table. I'm doomed, he whispered. Anthony triumphed. Come on, said Angelica. Quick, we've been asked to clear the corridor. What happens now? Asked Selena. What happens now? Be patient, said the lawyer. In the evening, Anthony and Selena took a walk around the city. Although they had already celebrated New Year's Eve, the festive atmosphere was still in the air. Everywhere, garlands, ribbons, large illuminated figures. Santa Clauses, as latecomers on the train, were still entertaining the public. This festive atmosphere eased Selena's sad thoughts a little, what her little girl had had to go through. Even in the most beautiful orphanage, with the most modern equipment and the most advanced ideas, the ghost of the past could dwell. Could her niece get rid of them? The blackbird began to fly and looked ready to take off. Frederick had taken all the children on his bus on 4 trips to countless excursions, exhibitions, and plays. The corridors and offices were full of completely different people. It's impossible to know for sure what they were looking for. They themselves will never talk about their findings, unless some information leaks to the press. But do you believe that? 2 days later, Celine was again ready for the endless test, but this time, by a strange coincidence, the trial lasted a minimum of time. John's place was taken by a woman of indeterminate age. Her appearance was simple: an old coat, a long shawl, a discreet hairstyle. However, there was something about her that made her attractive. The table in front of her was empty. There was only an open newspaper. Your Honor, said the kind woman. At the previous hearing, the former director of the orphanage had already spoken. After a careful analysis of the documents, we believe that her position was wrong. Certainly, the plaintiffs deserve the opportunity to become the guardians of our lovely child. So you recognize the claim? Asked the judge. The woman nodded. Only we ask that no court fees be charged. If this demand is made, it will be noted. We are a budget institution and therefore cannot afford expensive lawyers. No lawsuits of this kind have been filed yet, said the judge. They will be considered as they come in. When the judge read out his sentence in a high-pitched voice, Selena didn't understand. Lawyers should learn their own language, like doctors. But she realized from the lawyer's glowing face that they had achieved their goal. "And now," asked Selena, "when will I be able to take Marta home?" "Not so soon," smiled Angelica. "Now you'll have to visit her several times a week. Study with her, play with her, take part in her training. Once a month, you can go out on the town, to the theater or the circus, to a cafe, to the cinema. If you're satisfied with everything, you'll be able to solve the cohabitation problem in a year." "A whole year," exclaimed the girl. "No, don't think. I'm not complaining. It's just that everything is taking too long. Maybe I wasn't ready for that." Fortunately, she didn't make any mistakes in choosing a representative. Of course, the case was a little more scandalous than it seemed at first glance, but that's good. "What's going to happen to John?" asked Selena. "Is he going to jail?" "I don't know." Angelica shrugged. "That's not my problem. Look, Selena, you don't have to hate him. You need to feel sorry for him. The man really struggled to find a family, trying to build one the best way he knows how. But the truth is that you can't get your happiness from someone else's pain. Speaking of happiness, who can we talk to about finances? You or your husband?" That year, Santa Claus arrived a little late with his present. It was already February and the mountains of snow collected in December were almost melting when a beautiful aunt and her husband came to visit. The little girl was delighted. At first, she was afraid to talk to her new mother. Martha was shy and couldn't say 2 words, but Aunt Selena was persistent. She seemed to be interested in everything. Above all, she was interested in drawing, which she called painting. She would give them brushes and paints, and at the first opportunity, they would find a corner to themselves. Anthony was good too, although Martha found it hard to call him daddy. The girl drew him as a gentleman who protected his beautiful ladies. Life at the Blackbird had also changed. John disappeared as if he didn't exist. One day he was there, the next he was gone. A woman with the beautiful name of Leslie took his place. She smiled all the time when she looked at her children. She no longer demanded that they clean, cook, or do the laundry. But Martha didn't like this change. "You just have to wait a little longer, my child," Selena said. "We'll see your room soon. Are you happy?" Martha thought she wouldn't show anyone the photos of her new room, not even for 1,000 likes.